Good morning, it's April 5th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. At the turn of the century, in 1900, people living in Great Britain were fond of saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Of course, that was over 100 years ago, and Great Britain is not the world power that it once was. Since the end of World War II, its influence in the world political scheme has been on the decline. At the conclusion of the Second World War, there were two superpowers left standing, the United States and the Soviet Union. And we would enter a period of Cold War that would dominate the world political talk. Europe had been divided between free states and communist states. The loser in that war, Germany, became a two-nation state with East and West Germany. Even its capital, Berlin, was divided among the victors. In 1991, there was an unsuccessful coup against Mikhail Gorbachev that basically sealed the fate of the Soviet Union. It ended up diminishing Gorbachev's power and set the stage for Andrei Yeltsin and his pro-democratic forces to take power in Moscow. Gorbachev had made a decision to loosen the Soviet yoke on the countries of Eastern Europe and created independent democratic momentum that led to the collapse of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 and finally the overthrow of communist rule throughout Eastern Europe. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet hammer and sickle flag lowered for the last time over the Kremlin, being replaced with a Russian tricolor. Earlier in that day, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned his post as president of the Soviet Union, leaving Boris Yeltsin as president of the newly independent Russian state. Slowly but surely, Russia faded from the international scene, leaving only the United States as a true superpower in the world. This led to the rise of Vladimir Putin as a political leader of Russia. In 2000, he was elected to his first term as president. He was re-elected in 2004, and because he was constitutionally limited to 2 consecutive terms as president, he had to sit out a term. He then returned to the presidency of Russia in 2012 and recently had constitutional amendments passed that would allow him to run for another 2 terms, which would extend his reign in Russia until 2036. And make no mistake, he will continue to be elected because he controls the elections. At the same time, China was extending its reach throughout the world. Today, they would be considered a superpower on the political scene. Economically, they are one of the major powers in the world. They've been led by President Xi Jinping. This past year has seen China become even more aggressive in the area of foreign policy. They recently helped negotiate an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. President Xi has also met with Vladimir Putin, lending him political support for his invasion of Ukraine. And we see China extending their influence into Africa and Latin America at the same time. So where does this leave the United States as a leader of the free world? President Biden has failed to show any clear direction in foreign policy. He abruptly pulled out of Afghanistan without coordinating with our allies. The result was an ill-planned withdrawal, with 13 servicemen and women lost their lives. American citizens were left behind, and billions of dollars of equipment was left in the hands of the Taliban. He waffled on supporting Ukraine early and even said that a small incursion by Russia would be okay with him. He's been absent on the world stage in helping to negotiate agreements such as the one I just mentioned between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I cannot imagine any recent administration allowing such an event to occur without their input. Biden seems unwilling to confront our adversaries. His support for Ukraine in repelling the Russian invasions has always been a little bit too late. He had made a decision to arm the Ukrainians from the outset of the invasion. They would have been more than prepared and capable of defeating the Russians. They should have been given the anti-aircraft and missile defense systems early on. They should have been given the Abrams tanks early on. And Biden should have allowed our NATO allies to provide Ukrainians with the warplanes they needed. But Biden seems to always be more concerned about what Putin would think as opposed to making Putin concerned about what Biden would do. Just think what the equipment left in Afghanistan would mean to the Ukrainians fighting with the Russians. Biden needs to understand that we're in a war, and he tries to define this as a contest between democracies and autocracies. This may create a good soundbite, but it's a fatally flawed strategy. There are nations around the world that are less than perfect when it comes to democracy, but they are critical to advancing U.S. goals in their regions. The United States is in danger of becoming a second player on the world stage. China's passing us by because they're focused on what's important to them as a nation, while Biden seems more focused on showing how woke he can be. More and more of his fellow liberals in Congress demand that he ignore U.S. interests and instead back their policies that they feel fit their liberal agenda. They call for banning Israel, our only reliable ally in the Middle East, so they can trumpet their support for the Palestinians who do nothing for U.S. policy. He ignores relationship in the Southeast Asia because they are not pure enough for his democracy policies and allows China to be the power play in the region. For someone that chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Biden shows a huge lack of understanding of why it's important for the United States to be that beacon of freedom and that inspiration for the rest of the world. Otherwise, we'll soon become an island surrounded by countries influenced by our adversaries. The sun will set on us just as it did on Great Britain. It's been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.